Hello, everybody. I'm so pleased to welcome you all to the panel discussion, Transforming the Relationship of Business with Nature. In this session, we will look at the why, the what, and how of a nature-positive business. We will aim to answer the questions, why should business care about nature? What's at stake for them? And while we acknowledge that this is a long-term systems transition, how can businesses start to take action today? I'm Akanksha Khatri, and I head the nature and biodiversity work at the World Economic Forum. And in all my discussions with CEOs and other business stakeholders, I have often encountered the need to go beyond the headline into the details on how businesses can help to halt the nature crisis. I'm also a proud Network Council member for Science Based Targets Network, and I will be your moderator for today's session. And therefore, it gives me a huge pleasure to introduce you to the panelists representing the scientific, business, and NGO communities. First off, I would like to welcome Johan Rockström, Director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and co-chair of the Earth Commission. The Earth Commission, for those of you who may not know, is working on the science behind science-based targets for nature, which will translate the science into measurable actions that companies can take towards halting and reversing nature laws. Welcome, Johan.
Great to be with you.
Complementing Johan, we have Cláudia Azevedo, CEO of Sonae. Sonae is a multinational company headquartered in Portugal with a diversified portfolio of businesses, including retail, financial services, and technology. And Cláudia personally in the company has been a champion and leader of incorporating science-based targets for all decision-making. Welcome, Cláudia.
Thank you. Great to be here.
And if I may also give a little bit of a background about Sonae, being a critical member of the Science-Based Target Network's corporate engagement program, which today boasts over 100 organizations such as Sonae, providing feedback into the design phase of the SBTNs, to ensure that they are as user-friendly and as efficient as possible when they are available late next year for the companies to start setting targets. So thank you so much again for your leadership and the work that you and your teams are doing with us. Both Johan and Cláudia are also members of the World Economic Forum's Champion for Nature community, and therefore it gives me extra pleasure to be moderating this session with them. And finally, but definitely not last, welcome to Erin Billman, Executive Director of the Science Based Targets Network. Erin is a true systems leader of 21st century, working across geographies, companies, and organizations to influence positive change in a network. SBTN is no easy task. It's a coalition of over 50 leading global nonprofits and mission-driven organizations who have come together over and beyond their day jobs to answer the critical question, what can a company or city do to ensure that it's doing its part to create an equitable, net zero, nature positive future? Welcome, Erin.
Thank you for the kind words, Akanksha. Nice to be here today.
So let's get straight to business, starting from our first question today. Why should business actually care about it? What is in it for them? So Johan, if you let me turn first to you and just ask you that while climate change is something that is at the top of a lot of companies' agenda, there are over 1,500 companies setting science-based targets for climate. And most of them react with, aren't we doing enough through climate action? What more do we have to do? So could you help us understand that when it comes to nature and taking action on nature laws, how can we take this concept, which may seem a little abstract for companies to digest, and understand their relevancy for business to help them connect the dots that what we mean by nature is actually a complementary agenda to climate and nature? And ultimately, why should business care?
No, thanks, Akanksha. So I would actually argue that it's not so much that nature comes across as abstract. I think it more that it correctly comes across as complex. It is the whole complex web of life on planet Earth. So of course, it's a mouthful to take on. But fundamentally, we now have scientific, unequivocal scientific evidence that our only chance to have a stable and resilient planet in support of humanity in the future is if we become stewards of nature. Nature being all the biodiversity, but also the habitats, all the ecosystems that host not only the wildlife, all the animals and microbes and plants and trees that we depend on in our lives and health and economies, but also the processes and the systems like the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, the water cycle that we all depend on, not only for our immediate well-being, but also for the stability of weather and the planet. So it's fundamentally so that if we fail with taking care of nature, we will fail also with the Paris Climate Agreement. So there's no way of saying I'm only going to phase out my fossil fuels and focus on my scope 1, 2, 3, and thereby I'm doing enough on sustainability and delivering on climate. We also need to keep the biodiversity, nature intact, primarily for carbon sinks, of course, but also fundamentally for the thriving resilience for economies in the future. I mean, just to give you two statistics here. One is that we know that 70% of all infectious disease outbreaks are zoonoses that are viruses tipping over from nature via often domestic animals to humans. So if you want to stop the future pandemics, you take care of nature. And IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, in its latest report showed that 56% of our emission of greenhouse gases are taken up by nature in the ocean and on land. So, over half of our climate debt is actually subsidized by nature.
Thank you, Johan. That was perfect in terms of combining science, but also speaking the language of business. Thank you so much for bringing that perspective in, and couldn't agree more with you that when it comes to meeting our Paris agreements and subsidizing our climate debt, nature is both an ally and an asset. So appreciate those perspectives over there. So moving from the why to the what is at stake for business? Erin, if I could come to you next. There is a language which businesses understand well, and that is of risks and opportunities. So I'd love to understand from you, what are the risks for companies if they don't take action on nature? And what are the opportunities for companies who choose to be on as a front runner and be the ones who are taking opportunities with nature and for nature?
I think that this is a more timely question than ever. Some of the risks that are facing businesses have been felt firsthand in the past year and a half with supply chain disruptions. I think we'll see more labor shortfalls. We're seeing increasing demands from employees, from customers. Those are all trends that are only going to grow. And we actually just did a survey within the broader Global Commons Alliance of G20 countries, and we're seeing growing demands on business to act from across the society, including investors and consumers. 73% of people surveyed agree that their country's economy should move from a singular focus on profit to focusing on human well-being and ecological protection as well. And there's growing support for science-based targets for nature. 71% of the people polled in our survey agree that targets for achieving the protection and restoration of nature should be based on science. In addition to what Johan laid out so well around the loss of nature and the direct threat to the to economic activities, with ecosystem services providing roughly half of global GDP directly, it also makes business sense. Akanksha, you know well, the World Economic Forum's Future of Nature Business Report estimates that a nature-positive economy could unlock $10 trillion of business opportunities by transforming just 3 economic systems that are responsible for almost 80% of nature loss, which are food and infrastructure and energy. The time is right to be capitalizing on the opportunities for leading businesses to get out ahead on this issue and mitigate the risks that are so pressing today.
Thank you so much, Erin. And I couldn't agree more with you. Within the World Economic Forum, every year for the last 11 years, we have been releasing the Global Risks Report. And every year, the biodiversity risk has been rising to the top. It sits in top 3 in 2021, along with failure on action for climate change, as well as epidemics. So these things are quite intertwined, as also Johan was laying out. You cannot meet one goal without meeting the other. So moving from you to Cláudia. Cláudia, last year you were very kind to invite me and the World Economic Forum to present to your executive board. And I was quite blown away how much the company and its leaders were thinking about incorporating issues of science-based targets for nature as well as biodiversity risk into the decision making. But if you could help us understand, what was that one trigger at the beginning of Sonae's sustainability journey that took you to a path which is more nature positive? And what were some of the risks that you saw that if Sonae did not take that path, it could be facing? So help us understand from a business decision-making point of view.
Sure, thank you very much. I don't think there was one trigger. I mean, the Sonae's sustainability journey is always, I think, from inception. Sonae is 60 years old, and in the 70s, my father, that was founder of the company, would go to the government to protest against the forest management in Portugal. And now we see with the wildfires that he was very right in the 70s. In the 80s, we launched our first sustainability council in Sonae that joins all the different operating companies that you mentioned. We were founding members of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development in 95. So, we have been very aware of the problem. And today, as mainly retailers, we know that we can have a huge impact, positive and negative. And so we are very aware that we have to be good actors in this nature and biodiversity. In terms of triggers, there are moments of, our clients want to eat better food, local food, tastier food. We have our suppliers. We have, for example, here in Portugal, a club that joins the agriculture suppliers, and they're very eager also to do what's best because they feel firsthand some devastation in their ecosystems. We have our community, so a lot of triggers, a lot of pressures. And mainly, I think we see ourselves as being able to have a sustainable impact. And so this is why we've made nature and biodiversity one of our main pillars in sustainability. What does that mean in practical terms? We created a task force and where we invited you to speak. We integrated CBio, which is the leading Portuguese research center on biodiversity. And so bringing in the knowledge created in universities and by scientists. We joined the program that you mentioned of the Science-Based Targets Network and are in the development part of it. And we play a role, and me personally play a role in the World Economic Forum, Champion for Nature, and the CEO Action for the Green Deal, collaborate with Business for Nature. So we see this as the solution has to be a multi-stakeholder solution, and so as active as we can be to help solve the problem and the urgency of solving the problem, we're in. I mean, the risks are huge. I mean, there is no good business in a bad planet. Of course, it's not good for anybody. And we've seen it just this year with floods, fires. That it's climate change and nature are so linked, and as a retailer, we are very close to natural resources. So we have to be at the forefront of what impacts these natural resources.
Thank you, Cláudia. I think that was a really good journey of Sonae, and it's also a good reminder that these things cannot be done with a single trigger, but it truly is a journey which takes multiple years. I think it's also important to learn from you the proximity that you have as a business to natural resources, where a business has a huge amount of dependency and impact. So moving on from there, having heard as to why and how, I think most of the people want to hear the what. And particularly in the last year, the pandemic has raised the attention on nature significantly more. Businesses today recognize that it's a crisis that they should be taking part in addressing, but they don't really know how. So, Johan, if I may invite you, as it seems like you're always like 10 steps ahead of most people, why are science-based targets for nature the critical lever which companies should engage in?
Yeah, actually, I would have to take one or two steps backwards to really have the full argument for this, because it's up until just 20, 30 years ago, you could still run the world economy basically assuming that nature and the planetary system with the atmosphere and all the other functions in the Earth system were basically larger than the size of the economy. So there was redundant nature, biodiversity, ocean space, atmosphere for us to continue our economy and even having some negative impacts. Today, we have ample evidence that we reached the end of that road. We're hitting the ceiling of the biophysical capacity of the Earth system to buffer more. We've filled up the atmospheric space. We have filled up the oceans. We have lost basically all biodiversity that we can allow if we want to have a functioning Earth system and the ecosystem services that Erin were referring to earlier. So that leaves us with no choice. That if we are going to navigate the future, of course we need regulations. Of course we need economic policy. Of course we need, standards and all the over 500 international multilateral environmental agreements we have. But we also need quantitative guardrails or boundaries or targets for a safe operating space on planet Earth. We now have come to this point that we're coming so close to the edge of the entire planetary stability that we need science-based targets to guide humanity and thereby businesses to be innovative, to create prosperity, to have equity within a safe space. And that's what the science-based targets are all about. We have a science-based target for climate. That's a fantastic achievement. 1.5 degrees Celsius, that's the science-based target for climate. We do not have it for the other planetary boundaries. And the most important one is for nature. So that's the kind of entry point here. And the good news is that science, very much in dialogue with stakeholders around the world, are actually able to advance quantitative targets also for nature, despite the complexity. And this is where the partnership between the Earth Commission, which is, let's say, like the IPCC for the planet, together with SBTN, led by Erin, are able to advance this in support of quantitative targets for business. But the objective here is to be a guide, not to hamper innovation, but to trigger more innovation, to be able to stay within that space in the journey ahead.
Thank you, Johan. I think you alluded a little bit to the work that Earth Commission is doing with Science-Based Targets Network. Can you speak a little bit more to it?
Yeah, so we're, basically gathering natural scientists and social scientists to try and do an assessment. So we're basically, synthesizing the state of science, the state of knowledge today, to define safe and just targets for as many of the functions and processes that regulates the state of the Earth system. We've identified fresh water, land, biodiversity, nitrogen, phosphorus, and of course climate, and trying to quantify the safe targets, which is about stability of the Earth system. I mean, basically keeping the planet intact, but also just targets to try and identify what's the level of harm, the maximum allowed level of harm that the most vulnerable communities in the world can tolerate, which may be targets coming earlier than you bumping into the safe point where you may be crossing tipping points. And if I just stay for the safe targets for the moment, where does that knowledge come from? Well, it's that we have so much advancements in our understanding of how the planet works, not only in terms of environmental functions, but also particularly in terms of the risk of tipping points. So what we're doing is we're mapping across the entire planet, from the ice sheets to the ocean to the rainforest to the temperate forest. Where are the thresholds where we have scientific evidence that we may be pushing the system from a desired state that can support humanity and the economies into states that would reinforce a journey in the wrong direction, that we would be drifting off away from a state that can support humanity. And these tipping points can help us inform defining safe targets. And I'm quite hopeful here. We're working towards the first report to come out in June 2022 in conjunction with the Stockholm Plus 50 conference next year. And I hope we can have a peak view on this at the WEF Davos annual meeting, which will hopefully be held in January, and that we're helping out, particularly the SBTN, to try and fast track the nature positive agenda that is now getting more and more momentum in the run up to Kunming, the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity Summit, which basically, where we have very strong scientific support today that zero net loss of nature from now onwards is basically the starting point for a scientific target that can help guide the transition on regenerative and restorative efforts of trying to halt loss and then start building back to a nature positive future by 2050. But it's ongoing work right now.
Thank you, Johan. I think that was a really good comprehensive overview of what is coming and what businesses can expect, say, between now until June of 2022, with definitely key milestones like the World Economic Forum's annual meeting in Davos, as well as the key conventions of the biological diversity. There will also be the convention on combating desertification. And of course, all of that leading into Stockholm Plus 50. I mean, 50 years since the very first conference on environmental governance was ever held. So it's a really good time to stock take. Also 30 years since each of these conventions actually were adopted. So again, a chance to reflect on how far have we come, and yet how much farther do we need to go in terms of learning to play within the safe boundaries that you were talking about. You also spoke about the concept of nature positive, which you rightly said is really gaining momentum across different stakeholders. So if I could actually bring you, Erin, how do you think Science-Based Targets Network looks at the concept of nature positive? What's your relationship with it?
Mm-hmm. Well, for a target to be science-based, it's translating societal sustainability goals and Earth's limits that you heard an overview from Johan about into smart targets for companies. In the case of nature positive, we see it as the societal sustainability goal to slow and halt damage to and loss of nature, beginning with taking urgent action now to halt nature loss by 2030 and have full recovery by 2050. So really, this is about system level change. We need the science from Earth Commission and others to be setting the parameters. And then we need ambitious action from companies, but also from governments and the finance sector, civil society, multilateral organizations, all pooling together. And I think the key thing here is that it's shifting from an individual mindset of how can I do less bad, or how can we improve our reputation, to how can we work together to make sure the world continues to be livable. From a business perspective, this means that setting science-based targets contributing toward a nature positive future can provide a new business model based on regeneration, resilience, and recirculation, as opposed to the ways of old of destruction and pollution.
Thank you. I think it's the first time I've heard it spelled out so clearly, because there's just so much buzz, especially in the run-up to COP26 of the Climate Convention in November, which will be hosted in the UK, on nature positive. So I really appreciate you coming in with a very clear definition, which of course also builds on academic paper which has been published and authored by Johan Rockström, Harvey Locke, and multiple other actors in the space. So thank you for that. If I could maybe move towards the business perspective, and Johan mentioned that the Earth Commission will be coming out with a definition of the safe boundaries by June of 2022. We are expecting Science Based Targets Network for Nature coming out with their guidance and methodology by end of 2022. But one doesn't have to just keep on waiting for 2022. There has also been initial guidance that has been provided by SBTN, produced in consultation with over 65 global NGOs, companies, and consultancies. And these are the guidance which answer the question as to how can companies move today towards an equitable, net zero, nature positive future. And Sonae, as a company, is part of a coalition of 100 other companies, which together have a market capital of approximately $3 trillion. And Sonae has been actively contributing to the design phase of this SBTNs through the corporate engagement program. So Cláudia, if I could ask you, how is the corporate engagement program helping Sonae in its own journey to be nature positive?
Sure, I mean, we share, like many of the peers that you mentioned, a sense of urgency for nature action. And being part of this program really puts us in the forefront of the new developments. So it's great to be there, to learn, to discuss. Erin was saying a user-friendly how can that be as user-friendly in terms of the targets, and us contributing to that is very important. As you said, we are a multi-business company. So when we look at our sort of global nature strategy, it's great to have the same language in all businesses, to be able to measure, to access, and to get the targets, and do this in a common language. And for us to get an early start in such an urgent matter that's close to our heart, it has been great.
Thank you, Cláudia. Maybe moving from risks and preparing for future and then towards an opportunity, could you help us also understand that by moving business model, by moving towards a market which is more nature positive, what does Sonae have to gain? Like, what are some of the new opportunities that you are unlocking for your business?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are very intangible benefits, and I mean, if people want to work with you, if they think that you're a better corporate citizen, and so you have all the intangible benefits of having better employees or better partners, better suppliers working with you. And then there are very tangible benefits, and just to give two very short examples, for example, food waste, which is huge in our industry, and it's the whole value chain from production until our client's home. We have been doing some food loss pilot programs, and we've seen that we can reduce by a third, which in our case is something like $10 million a year, and you know, and the other benefits are huge, and we can do better in that. Another example is we were the first Portuguese retailer to have the accreditation, the fishery accreditation, wild fishery and aquaculture, and we did a project with a partner to do in the south of Portugal, in the Algarve, a sea bream project that respected exactly all the certification, from the design, the conditions at sea, the feed. And we did also a TV campaign where we actually filmed the people that take care of it out at sea, and then in our stores in the fish counters. And today we have 3 kinds of sea breams for sale: the wild one, ours, which we call the sea bream from the Algarve, and then other aquaculture sea breams. And I can say that ours is the middle priced one, and is a huge success of sales. And so when you do everything right and you explain to people, you have business benefits and also natural benefits.
Thank you, Cláudia. I'm also delighted that both the examples that you chose are from the food, land, and ocean use system, which, as we heard at the start of the session, is also the biggest driver of nature loss. So both understanding it from a systems point of view, a supply chain point of view, and reducing food waste, but also educating consumers and responding to their needs for a more sustainable product. Absolutely hats off in terms of seeing a business which is thinking about it so proactively. So thank you so much for sharing those examples with us. And with that, I would like to move to Erin for the last slightly difficult question, because I get this all the time, is what do you want me to do today? I have my stakeholders, I have my shareholders, consumers all screaming at me that companies have to halt nature loss. But I don't have the guidance, I don't have the targets. What can I do today?
I would love to have a single soundbite, because I know that's how it works best. The first and most important thing is mapping and understanding your value chain, because that is the necessary first step to understanding where you have the most impacts and dependencies on nature. We already have initial corporate guidance that you mentioned, Akanksha, that we released last year. That is a meaty starting point in terms of guidance. In particular, companies that don't already have a climate science-based target should set one, because that is one of the key drivers of nature loss. Beyond that, there is already consensus on no further deforestation that there's existing guidance on, as well as the importance for companies that work more closely on land impacts, that they be working on increasing ecological integrity, and also increasing the quality and decreasing the quantity of freshwater use. So those are the handful of what we call interim targets that are directionally correct for companies to be acting on now. For those companies that are particularly wanting to lean into our participatory design, as Cláudia and Sonae are part, you can join the Science Based Targets Network Corporate Engagement Program. So I will leave it at that for now, but happy to continue the conversation with any company that's looking for further guidance.
No, thank you so much. I knew that wasn't an easy question. That's why I had to give it to you as the absolutely fearless leader of SBTN. And with that, I want to thank the entire panel for this very, very enlightening discussion. And I hope this actually encourages more scientists, more NGOs, and more companies to actually engage in the development and then finally adoption of science-based targets for nature. I have personally seen the clarity of business and understanding that colleagues at Sonae have, and often have also come into our communities in terms of educating other businesses. Johan, of course, continues to be a stalwart in terms of both educating businesses, but also really opening doors to a different way of thinking about the economy and learning to play within the safe planetary boundaries. And Erin, I think since the time she has joined this network, has completely taken the concept of collaboration to completely new heights. So thank you to each one of you for engaging with us. And we will leave you now with a short video of science-based targets for nature. Thank you.
Something's coming that will change everything, that will help your business get ahead of the curve. For the first time, we are creating science-based targets for nature to complement those that exist for climate. These new targets are focused on the ocean, freshwater, land, and biodiversity. In fact, all life on Earth, and will help you protect both nature and your business. They will help you gain greater interest from investors and enjoy stronger brand equity. They'll help you attract emerging talent and boost customer satisfaction. This will all add up to a more robust bottom line and a more resilient planet. The time to act is now. Discover the true impact of your business on nature. Evolve to protect nature and your company. Then track your progress. Science-based targets for nature helps you shape the future of business and the planet. Start now